Picture our pale blue planet from far above, turning slowly in the dark, half lit by a distant sun. Before we go any further, if you want a brand new space topic every single night to fall asleep to, subscribe. One tap and a new story is waiting for you every evening. From this high view, the oceans look smooth and empty, a deep wash of blue that covers most of the world. But if you let your gaze drift down through the clouds, down through the soft light bending on the surface of the water, you begin to see ribbons of pale turquoise. They curl along coastlines. They trace the rims of sunken islands. They glow faintly against the deeper sea, like quiet brushstrokes left behind by something patient and old. These pale ribbons are coral reefs, and from space, they look like simple shapes of color. But each one is a city. Each one was built grain by grain, by animals so small you could fit thousands of them on the palm of your hand. That is the strange and wondrous fact at the heart of tonight's story. The largest living structures on Earth were not made by anything large at all. They were made by tiny, soft, almost transparent creatures working in slow silence for tens of thousands of years. A single coral animal is called a polyp. It looks like a fragile little flower with a ring of waving arms. It has no brain. It has no eyes. It has no hard bones inside it. And yet, over the long span of generations, polyps build limestone towers, ridges, terraces, and walls so vast that astronauts can see them from orbit. The Great Barrier Reef alone stretches more than 1,400 miles along the eastern coast of Australia. From the right altitude, it looks like a long, glowing scar across the side of the sea, beautiful and complicated, drawn by something that does not seem to know it is drawing. How can something so small create something so large? That is one of the gentle puzzles we will sit with tonight. And here is the heavier puzzle behind it. These reefs, these vast quiet cities, are disappearing. They are disappearing more quickly than the rainforests on land. Scientists believe that in the past few decades, somewhere around half of the world's shallow coral reefs have been lost or badly damaged. The numbers are not precise. The full picture is still being measured, but the trend is real, and it is faster than almost anyone expected. Why this is happening, how fast it will continue, and whether the corals themselves might somehow adapt. These are open questions. There are several theories. Some researchers believe warming water is the main driver. Others point to changes in ocean chemistry, or to pollution drifting out from rivers, or to a slow combination of all of these working together. The reefs are answering in their own quiet way. Some bleach and turn ghostly white. Some recover. Some do not. The science is not finished. The full story is still being written, slowly, by the corals themselves. So tonight, we will drift above this hidden world. We will look down at the soft turquoise ribbons from high above. We will sink slowly through warm, shallow water, past schools of small, bright fish, past sea fans waving in the current, into the strange architecture the polyps have made. We will visit reefs older than the oldest forests. We will visit cold water reefs that have never seen the sun. We will sit with the mystery of why corals glow in colors we do not fully understand, and why they all spawn together under certain moons, and what the silence of a dying reef really means. There will be no rush. There will be no alarm. The point of this slow tour is not to worry. The point is to wonder, to let your mind rest on something soft and ancient and still being discovered. Coral reefs have existed in some form for more than 400 million years, long before dinosaurs walked, long before the first trees stood tall on land. They have survived ice ages and warm ages and the rearranging of continents. They are not new. They are not fragile in the way a single flower is fragile. They are fragile in the way a city is fragile when the conditions that allowed it to be built begin to change. That is the open question waiting beneath you tonight. As your breathing slows, as the light in the room grows soft, picture the pale turquoise ribbons curling along the edges of the continents, tiny builders, vast cities, an uncertain future. Let us drift down toward them, gently, together. To understand a reef, we should start with the smallest piece of it. We should start with a single polyp. A coral polyp is a tiny animal, soft and simple, about the size of a grain of rice. Some are even smaller, no bigger than the head of a pin. Others can grow as wide as a coin. If you held one in your hand, you would barely see it. You would feel almost nothing at all. The polyp has a soft, tube-shaped body, open at the top, with a ring of tiny arms called tentacles. Those tentacles wave slowly in the water, reaching for drifting food. At the center sits a simple mouth, which is also the only opening the polyp has. Food goes in. Waste comes out the same way. It is one of the oldest body plans in the animal kingdom, shared with jellyfish and sea anemones. Beneath that soft body, the polyp does something quietly amazing. It pulls calcium and carbonate from the seawater around it. Then it lays those minerals down as a hard cup of limestone, right under its own foot. The cup is its home. The cup is its skeleton. Each polyp sits inside this tiny stone bowl, soft on top, hard below. Then, the polyp does something even stranger. It copies itself. A bud forms on its side, and from that bud, another polyp grows. That new polyp builds its own limestone cup joined to the first. The two polyps share tissue. They share food. They share a single living skin stretched across the stone. Soon there are 4, then 16, then thousands. A coral colony is what we call this gathering. It is not really one animal, and it is not really many. It sits somewhere in between. The whole colony shares one connected body, even though each polyp is its own tiny self. Scientists still wonder about this question. Where exactly does the individual end and the group begin? The boundary is softer than the limestone they leave behind. The growth is slow. Most reef-building corals add only a few millimeters of skeleton each year. Some massive corals, the kind shaped like great round boulders, grow even slower, about 1 centimeter a year. That is roughly the thickness of a pencil. To build a coral head the size of a small car, the colony may need 100 years or more. To build a reef the size of a city, you need many thousands of years stacked on top of each other. This is the strange truth of a reef. The living part is only a thin skin on the very top, just a few centimeters of soft tissue glowing with color, alive with movement. Everything below it is stone. Everything below it was built by polyps that lived and died long ago. A reef is mostly a graveyard with a living roof. Think of a city of coral the way you might think of a coral town, built on the bones of older towns. The current polyps are the newest residents. Beneath their feet sit the limestone homes of their parents. Beneath those, their grandparents. The deepest layers of a reef can be tens of thousands of years old. Some reef foundations go back hundreds of thousands of years, and the oldest coral lineages stretch back further still. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia is the largest of these stone cities. It runs for about 2,300 kilometers along the coast, which is roughly the distance from New York to Florida. You can see it from space. It is the largest single structure ever built by living things on Earth. And every bit of it was made by animals smaller than your fingernail. There are reefs in the Caribbean, in the Red Sea, around Indonesia, near the islands of the Pacific. Some are wide, flat platforms just under the waves. Some rise up as steep walls that drop into deep blue water. Some form rings called atolls, where an old volcano sank slowly into the sea and the coral kept growing upward to stay in the light. That last detail matters. Most reef-building corals need sunlight. They live in shallow, clear, warm water, usually no deeper than about 50 meters. Below that, the light grows too thin, the polyps grow weak, the building slows and stops. So a reef is, in the simplest terms, a stone city built by soft little animals reaching for the sun. Each builder is small and brief. The city they leave behind is enormous and ancient. How something so delicate makes something so vast is a question we will keep returning to as the night goes on. To understand how a coral reef came to be, we have to imagine a moment long ago in the warm shallows of an ancient sea. A small, soft animal drifted through the sunlit water, looking for a place to settle. It was simple, almost transparent, with a ring of tiny arms around a single mouth. It was hungry, but the water around it was thin and quiet. There was not much food to catch. Somewhere in that early sea, a quiet meeting took place. A small, drifting creature came close to a single-celled algae cell. The algae was tiny, golden brown, and lived by drinking in sunlight. Most animals that swallow algae simply digest them. But this time, something different happened. The algae was not broken down. It was kept alive, sheltered inside the soft body of the little animal. No one knows exactly when this first happened. The fossil record gives us hints, but soft-bodied creatures rarely leave clear traces in the stone. One idea is that the partnership began more than 200 million years ago, when modern stony corals first appeared. Another possibility is that the bond is far older, traced back through earlier coral-like animals that have since vanished from the seas. The exact moment remains a quiet mystery, hidden somewhere in deep time. What we do know is that the arrangement was a kind of trade. The algae, tucked safely inside the coral's tissue, took in sunlight and turned it into sugar. Some of that sugar leaked out and fed the coral. In return, the coral gave the algae a safe place to live and a steady supply of the small chemicals it needed. Neither could thrive alone in the same way. Together, they could do something neither could do apart. This partnership has a long scientific name. The algae are called zooxanthellae, which simply means tiny yellow cells that live inside other animals. They are so small that millions of them can fit inside a single square inch of coral skin. They give the coral most of its color, the soft greens and warm browns and golden hues that paint a healthy reef. Without them, the coral itself is nearly clear, a ghostly shape made of thin, pale tissue stretched over white stone. The deal changed everything. With the help of its tiny guests, the coral suddenly had far more energy than it could ever catch on its own. It used that energy to build. Slowly, layer by layer, it pulled minerals from the seawater and laid them down beneath itself as a hard cup of limestone. Each polyp made its own small home. Each home connected to the next. Over time, those tiny homes grew into ridges, then into mounds, then into vast stone gardens that stretched for miles. For this to work, the conditions had to be almost perfect. The water needed to be warm, but not too warm. It needed to be clear, so sunlight could reach the algae deep inside the coral tissue. It needed to be salty in just the right way, and rich in the minerals that build limestone. Move the reef into water that is too cold, too dark, too fresh, or too cloudy, and the partnership begins to fail. The algae cannot make enough sugar. The coral cannot build its stone. The whole quiet city slows down. Researchers still wonder about the deeper details of this bond. Some study how the coral and the algae talk to each other through chemical signals. Some explore why certain types of algae pair with certain types of coral, and why some pairings seem stronger than others. There are open questions about how the partnership first locked into place and whether it has been broken and remade many times across the long history of the sea. Each fossil reef we find tells us a little more. None of them tell us the whole story. There is something tender about this origin. A reef is not the work of one creature. It is the work of two very different living things that learned somehow to share a single body, a soft animal that could not see, and a tiny plant-like cell that could not move. Together, they became the largest living structures on Earth. When you drift into the deep tonight, you can picture that first quiet moment. A small, simple animal in a warm, ancient sea. A speck of golden algae catching the light. A meeting so small that no one was there to see it. And from that meeting, slowly, over millions of years, the great reefs of the world began to rise from the dark seafloor toward the sun. A coral reef is a strange thing to hold in your mind. From far away, it looks like a single living creature breathing slowly under the waves. Up close, it is mostly stone. The soft animals live only on the surface, a thin skin of color stretched over a vast white skeleton built by their ancestors. To understand what a reef is made of, we have to look at the stone itself and then follow its ingredients backward, all the way to stars that died long before the Earth was born. The stone of a reef is limestone. More precisely, it is a mineral called calcium carbonate, made of calcium, carbon, and oxygen. The coral polyp pulls these elements out of the seawater around it and weaves them into a hard cup beneath its body. Over many lifetimes, those cups stack into branches. The branches grow into mounds. The mounds grow into ridges that can be seen from space. Each of those elements has a long story. The calcium in a coral skeleton was forged inside a star. Long before our sun existed, other stars lived and died across the galaxy. In their hot cores, they fused light atoms into heavier ones, building calcium and many other elements, one slow step at a time. When those old stars ran out of fuel, they collapsed and scattered their insides into space. The dust drifted for ages. Eventually, some of it gathered into the cloud that became our solar system. The calcium in your bones and the calcium in the reef came from the same ancient ash. The carbon has a similar story. It also formed inside stars in the slow nuclear furnaces of giants near the end of their lives. On Earth, carbon moves through a long cycle. It rises from volcanoes as gas, dissolves into the oceans, gets pulled into coral skeletons, and is later locked away in stone. The white cliffs and pale islands of the world are partly made of this story. A reef is, in a quiet way, a place where stardust slows down for a while and takes the shape of a wall. The water itself is another puzzle. The oceans cover most of our planet, yet researchers still wonder exactly where all that water came from. One idea is that much of it was already mixed into the dust and rock that built the early Earth, and it slowly seeped out through volcanoes over millions of years. Another idea is that comets and wet asteroids delivered large amounts of water later, crashing into the young planet and adding to its seas. Most likely the truth is some blend of both, but the proportions remain an open question. When a coral polyp draws seawater into its tiny body, it may be sipping from a sea that is part homegrown and part delivered from the dark edges of the solar system. Even the air the corals depend on has a deep history. Reefs need oxygen, and oxygen was once rare on this planet. For billions of years, Earth's atmosphere held almost none of it. Then, tiny ocean microbes began releasing oxygen as waste, slowly changing the sky. Without that long, quiet shift, no coral could ever have lived. The breath of a reef is borrowed from invisible ancestors that no one will ever see. Inside the coral itself, there is one more ingredient worth noticing. The soft tissue of the polyp is built mostly from carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, with traces of phosphorus and sulfur and a faint dusting of metals. Iron, in particular, threads through nearly every living thing on Earth. The iron in coral cells and the iron in the planet's hot core came from the same source. Heavy elements like iron formed during the violent deaths of massive stars. Every reef carries a faint memory of those old explosions, so when you picture a reef, try to see it in layers. There is the bright skin of living polyps on top. Beneath that, the white stone built by countless earlier polyps. Inside the stone, atoms of calcium and carbon that once drifted between the stars. Around it, water that may have ridden in on comets. Above it, an ocean of oxygen made by lives long gone. How all of these threads came together in just the right way to allow reefs to exist at all is still a question. Scientists circle carefully. The chemistry works. The timing worked. Whether the same recipe could be running on other worlds, in oceans we have not yet seen, is something no one can yet say. For now, the reef sits quietly on the seafloor, a small cathedral of borrowed stardust, holding its shape against the tide. Off the northeast coast of Australia, a vast living structure stretches for more than 1,400 miles. We call it the Great Barrier Reef, though the name almost feels too small for what it actually is. It is not one reef, but a chain of nearly 3,000 reefs and hundreds of small islands, all built grain by tiny soft animals over thousands of years. From space, it shows up as a soft blue and green ribbon along the edge of the continent. From below, it is a slow city of limestone, shaped by forces most of us never see. Those forces have been at work for a very long time. The reef we see today sits on top of much older reefs, layered like pages in a quiet book. Sea levels rise and fall over thousands of years, and the corals follow. When the water climbs, the polyps grow upward toward the light. When the water drops, the old structures dry out and become the foundation for the next round of building. The reef is always chasing the sun, slowly, 1 millimeter at a time. Currents are part of the shaping too. Warm tropical water moves down from the equator and brushes along the Australian coast, carrying tiny floating creatures the corals eat at night. The currents also carry coral larvae, those nearly invisible specks of new life, and drop them onto bare stone where they can settle and begin again. Without that steady flow, the reef could not spread the way it does. The water itself is a kind of slow river, moving life from one place to another across the open sea. Tides press in too, twice a day, lifting and lowering the surface above the corals. In some shallow lagoons, the tide can leave the tops of the reef almost exposed to the air. The polyps living up there have to be tougher than their cousins in deeper water. They handle stronger sunlight, warmer pools, and brief moments when the sea pulls back and leaves them glistening under the open sky. Just a few feet lower, the conditions are completely different, and different kinds of coral grow there. The reef sorts itself by depth, by light, by the pull of the moon. Wind and storms have a hand in the shape as well. Tropical cyclones move across these waters every few years, and when they do, they break apart the most exposed branches and tables of coral. Strange as it sounds, this damage is part of how the reef stays healthy over long stretches of time. Broken pieces tumble down the slope and become new ground for the next generation. A reef that never feels a storm can become old and brittle. A reef that feels too many cannot recover between them. The balance is delicate, and we do not fully understand where the line sits. The Great Barrier is the largest of these living systems, but it has many quiet cousins scattered around the world. The Mesoamerican Reef curves along the coasts of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, the second largest of its kind. The reefs of the Red Sea grow in unusually warm and salty water, and some researchers wonder if those corals carry secrets about heat tolerance the rest of the ocean has lost. The reefs of the Coral Triangle near Indonesia and the Philippines hold more species than anywhere else on Earth. Each of these systems, formed under slightly different forces, each one is a slightly different answer to the same long question of how to build a living city in shallow water. What remains open is why some reefs grow so much faster than others, even when the water seems similar. One idea is that small differences in current and nutrient flow add up over centuries. Another is that the local mix of coral species matters more than the water itself. A third possibility is that the deep stone beneath the reef, the old foundation, shapes the modern growth in ways we have not yet measured. The evidence is incomplete. Reefs do not give up their secrets quickly. The forces at work here are gentle compared to the ones that shape mountains or carve canyons. There is no sudden uplift, no roar of rock against rock, only warm water, soft light, slow currents, the breath of tides, and the patient work of animals smaller than your fingernail. Over thousands of years, these quiet forces build something visible from orbit. And tonight, somewhere along that long blue ribbon, the polyps are still at work, adding their tiny grains of stone to a structure that began long before any of us were born, and that no one has ever fully understood. Reef-building corals live inside a very narrow window. They want water that is warm, but not too warm. They want it clear, but not empty. They want it salty, but not too salty. And they want sunlight that reaches them like a soft lamp through a thin curtain. Move just outside any one of these ranges, and the tiny builders start to struggle. The temperature window is surprisingly small. Most reef-building corals do their best work between about 23 and 29 degrees Celsius. That's roughly the range of a warm bath that has cooled for a few minutes. Push the water just 1 or 2 degrees above the upper edge for a few weeks, and the corals begin to lose their algae partners. Drop it a few degrees below, and growth slows almost to a stop. The whole grand structure of a reef, built across thousands of years, depends on a thermal sweet spot no wider than the temperature swing inside your own kitchen during a single day. To feel how delicate that is, picture the entire range of ocean temperatures on Earth as a long hallway. At one end, the freezing polar seas. At the far end, the hot springs and undersea vents. Reef corals can only live in a small doorway near the middle. Slide them a few steps in either direction, and they cannot build. Light matters almost as much. The algae inside coral tissue needs sunlight to make food, the way a leaf does. So reefs cluster in the upper layer of the ocean, mostly in the top 30 meters or so. Below about 70 meters, the light grows too dim for most reef-building species to thrive. 70 meters is shorter than the length of a soccer field laid on its side. Out of an ocean that averages around 3,700 meters deep, the bright reef-building zone is a film at the very top, about 2% of the water column. Saltiness has its own narrow band. Open ocean water sits near 35 parts per thousand of salt. Most reef corals prefer something very close to that. Heavy rainfall, a flooding river, or a melting glacier can pour fresh water into a bay and tip the balance. The corals near the river mouth pale and shrink, while those a kilometer offshore carry on. The line between healthy reef and bare seabed can sometimes be drawn by the reach of a single stream. Then there is clarity. Corals need clean water because their algae need light. Mud and silt act like a closed shutter. Too much sediment in the water, and the reef goes dark even at noon. Yet the water cannot be completely empty either. Coral polyps still reach out at night to catch tiny drifting animals called plankton, the floating specks that feed much of the sea. So the water has to be clear enough for sunlight, but rich enough for a midnight meal. Put all these conditions together on a globe, and the map of possible reefs is surprisingly thin. A loose belt around the equator, roughly between 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south, where the surface stays warm year-round. Inside that belt, only the places with the right currents, the right depth, the right clarity, and the right salt. If you painted every square meter of reef-friendly water onto Earth, it would cover less than 1/10 of 1% of the planet's surface. A thin ribbon no wider than a small country, wrapped loosely around the middle of the world. The corals themselves are even smaller against that scale. A single polyp, the soft animal that does the actual building, is often no bigger than a grain of rice. Stack a few million grains of rice along a coastline, and you get the Great Barrier Reef, more than 2,300 kilometers long, large enough to be visible from orbit. The mismatch is hard to hold in the mind. Something the size of a sesame seed, repeated patiently for 10,000 years, becomes a structure you can see from space. And here the open question begins to drift into view. We know the ranges, we can measure the temperature, the salt, the light. What we do not yet fully understand is how much each coral species can stretch those ranges before something gives way. Some reefs in the Persian Gulf already endure summer water near 35 degrees Celsius, hotter than most corals are supposed to tolerate. How they do it remains an active puzzle. Whether other reefs could ever learn the same trick in the time they have is one of the quiet questions we will sit with as the night goes on. Imagine drifting just above the surface of a living reef. The water is warm and clear, and the light from above breaks into slow shifting ribbons that move across everything below. You float there, weightless, and the first thing you notice is that the reef does not look like a single thing. It looks like a city made of slow stone and bright flesh, all woven together, all breathing in the same quiet rhythm. The colors come at you in soft layers. There are mounds the color of pale sand, rising in gentle domes. There are branches the color of mustard, the color of plum, the color of a sunset, held just below boiling. There are flat plates that spread out like dinner tables stacked at odd angles, their edges trimmed in lavender or in the faintest electric blue. Some corals look like small brains, folded and grooved, sitting on the seafloor like quiet sculptures. Others look like fans, like antlers, like fingers reaching slowly upward toward the light. And here is where the question begins to drift in. Looking down at all of this, you would have a hard time saying where the living part ends and the stone part begins. A coral colony is mostly limestone. The hard skeleton makes up the shape, the branches, the domes, the plates, but the living animals are only a thin film on the very outside. They cover the stone like a soft skin, sometimes only a few cells thick. The whole great structure beneath them is something they made and then left behind, layer by layer, over hundreds or even thousands of years. So, is the reef itself alive, or is it a kind of monument built by life and still being added to? The animals on the surface are clearly alive. They eat. They sting. They pull in tiny prey from the water at night. They open and close, but the stone they sit on was made by their ancestors, who are long gone. That stone is no more alive now than the shells on a beach. And yet, without it, the whole reef would not exist. The living skin needs the dead skeleton, and the dead skeleton was once living skin. Some biologists describe a coral colony as a single organism. Each polyp shares tissue with its neighbors, and they pass food and signals to one another through tiny connections. Other biologists describe a colony as a group of separate animals living in close partnership. The honest answer is that corals sit somewhere in between, in a place that our usual words for life do not quite fit. They are not quite one thing and not quite many. Float closer, and the textures sharpen. The surface of a brain coral is not smooth. It is covered in tiny mouths, each one ringed by a small crown of tentacles, all tucked away during the day. The branches of a staghorn coral feel almost like rough porcelain, with each branch tipped slightly paler than the rest because that is where new growth is happening. A plate coral feels delicate, almost like thin pottery, and you can see the faint outlines of polyps arranged in neat rings across its top. In the gentle current, soft corals sway. They are different from the hard reef builders. They do not make stone. They are flexible, fleshy, often shaped like little trees or feathered fans. They lean with the water, then straighten, then lean again. Beside them, the hard corals do not move at all. Two ways of being alive, side by side, in the same warm water. Look at the cracks and the shadows. The reef has caves and overhangs and small dark tunnels. In some of these, you might see the slow waving of a sea fan, deep red against the dark. In others, the white edges of fresh growth glow softly as the colony slowly expands into new space. And here and there, you see patches of pale stone with no living skin at all. These patches are quiet. They are the older parts, the parts the living layer has moved away from, or the parts where something has gone wrong. That patchwork raises the open question again. A reef can be partly alive and partly not in the same square foot on the same afternoon. There is no single moment when a reef is born and no single moment when it dies. It is always doing both on different parts of itself at different speeds. Some researchers wonder if our usual ideas of alive and not alive are simply too small for a thing like this. Tonight, drifting above this slow, bright city, it is enough to notice that the question has no clean answer and to let it sit there gently. Drift down with me now, past the bright shallows where the sunlight dances, into the deeper water where a reef begins to show its truer face. Down here, the light grows softer. Blue swallows the warmer colors first. Red fades, then orange, then yellow, until the world becomes a quiet hall of cool tones and long shadows. And yet, even in this dim and filtered light, the corals glow. They glow in ways that scientists still cannot fully explain. Some corals shine in soft greens, others pulse with gentle pinks, sleepy purples, or a strange electric blue that seems almost too vivid for the deep. Under certain wavelengths of light, whole sections of reef begin to fluoresce, lighting up like a slow, silent festival on the sea floor. The animals themselves do not give off heat or sparks. They take in one color of light and quietly send back another. The biology behind this trick is partly understood. The reason for it is not. For a long time, scientists thought these glowing pigments served a single simple purpose. The leading idea was sunscreen. In bright, shallow water, the proteins inside the coral might soak up harmful rays and protect the tiny algae living in its tissues. That theory still holds for many shallow species. But then divers began to find glowing corals far below the bright zone, in water so deep that sunburn cannot be the answer. Some of these corals live 100 meters down, where the sun is only a memory. Down there, a different idea took shape. Some researchers wonder if the deep corals use their pigments to do the opposite of sunscreen. Instead of blocking light, they may gather it. The proteins might catch faint blue light and bend it into wavelengths the algae can actually use for food. In this view, the coral is wearing a kind of slow, living lamp, coaxing energy from a sea that has almost none to give. It is a beautiful idea. It is also not fully proven. Other researchers point to different possibilities. Perhaps the colors help corals talk to the small creatures that drift past. Perhaps certain shades attract helpful algae and invite them to settle in. Perhaps the glow warns away nibbling fish, or perhaps it draws in tiny hunters who will eat the things that nibble. Some pigments may simply be byproducts of stress, with no purpose at all. The honest answer is that we do not yet know which of these stories is true, and the truth may be a quiet blend of all of them. Beneath the visible glow lies another layer of mystery, the architecture of the coral skeleton itself. Each polyp builds its limestone cup with a structure so fine that it can only be seen under powerful microscopes. The crystals lock together in patterns that engineers still study with quiet awe. Some species lay down their skeletons in delicate fans. Others build dense, heavy boulders that grow only a few millimeters a year. The same chemistry, the same calcium and carbonate produces 1,000 different shapes. How a soft little animal chooses its form remains an open question. Deeper inside the tissue, the partnership with algae hides further secrets. Each coral may host many strains of these tiny photosynthetic partners. and the mix can shift over time. Some strains tolerate warmer water, others prefer the cold. Some produce more food, others may produce more of the glowing proteins. Researchers are slowly mapping these blends, trying to learn why one coral picks one partner and its neighbor picks another. The answers seem to change with depth, with season, with the chemistry of the water around them. The deeper you look, the more the reef stops being a single creature and starts being a layered city. The visible polyps are only the surface. Below them lie skeletal records of older generations, stacked in slow rings like the inside of a tree. Within the living tissue swims a hidden world of bacteria, viruses, and microscopic guests, most of them still unnamed. Each coral may carry its own private microbiome, a community of tiny lives so complex that scientists have only sketched its outline. So when you picture a coral in the gentle dark, picture it as more than a colored shape. Picture a glowing animal with a stone skeleton, sharing its body with sun-eating partners, surrounded by invisible neighbors, signaling in light we cannot yet read. We see the glow, we can measure the wavelengths, we can name the proteins. We still cannot say with full confidence why the reef shines the way it shines. And that quiet not knowing is part of what makes the deep water such a peaceful place to wonder. Once each year, on a small handful of nights, something remarkable happens on reefs around the world. The corals release their eggs and sperm into the water all at once in a slow, drifting blizzard of pale pink and white. The water turns cloudy with life. Bundles the size of poppy seeds rise toward the surface in their millions, glowing faintly in the dark. From above, the sea looks as if it has been gently dusted with stars. This is coral spawning, and it remains one of the strangest cycles in the ocean. Whole reefs, stretching for hundreds of miles, can release their tiny bundles within the same hour. Corals that have never touched one another, separated by reefs and channels and open water, somehow let go together. The timing is so precise that researchers can mark it on a calendar months in advance. And yet, after decades of watching, no one can fully explain how the corals know. The clues we do have point to a quiet conversation between the sky, the sea, and the animals themselves. The corals seem to read the temperature of the water as it slowly warms through the season. They seem to read the length of the day, the way the light shifts as summer arrives. They seem to read the cycle of the moon, waiting for a particular phase, often a few nights after the full moon, when the tides grow gentle. And then, on the chosen night, they seem to read the sunset itself, releasing only after the sky has darkened to a certain depth. Each of these signals is a piece of the puzzle. None of them on its own explains the precision. Two reefs on opposite sides of a coastline can spawn within minutes of each other, even though their local conditions differ. One possibility is that the corals carry a kind of inner calendar, a slow biological clock tuned to many overlapping rhythms at once. Another idea is that chemicals released by the first corals to spawn drift through the water and trigger their neighbors, setting off a cascade. The two theories are not in conflict, and both may be part of the answer. The question of how they truly synchronize remains open. The spawning itself is a slow, dreamlike event. The polyps swell with the bundles for weeks before the night arrives. Then, in the hours after sunset, the coral seems to breathe. The bundles rise one by one through the mouths of the polyps, hesitate at the lip, and lift away into the dark water. Each bundle holds both eggs and sperm, packed together in a tiny waxy sphere. They float upward because they are lighter than seawater, gathering at the surface in pale drifts that the currents push into long, soft lines. Up there, in the calm layer just beneath the air, the bundles break apart. The eggs and sperm meet, mostly from different colonies, mixing the gene pool across the reef. The fertilized eggs become tiny swimming larvae called planulae, each one a pale teardrop drifting in the plankton. They will wander for days or weeks before, if they are lucky, settling onto a hard surface and beginning the slow work of building a new colony. Most will not survive. The ocean is vast and full of mouths. This yearly pulse is the reef's quiet heartbeat. It is how a structure that looks like stone manages to move, to spread, to find new ground. Without these nights, the reef would only be the colonies already there, slowly growing outward by budding. With them, the reef becomes something that can travel, drifting on currents to seed places it has never been. What still puzzles researchers is how this cycle holds up under stress. On reefs where the water grows too warm, the spawning can shift, weaken, or fall out of sync. Some colonies release early, some release late, some skip the night entirely. The synchronized blizzard becomes a scattered sprinkle, and fewer of the bundles find their match in the dark. Whether the corals can relearn their timing as the ocean changes, or whether the rhythm itself is something fragile, set long ago and slow to adapt, is one of the questions hanging over the reefs right now. For tonight, picture only the calm version. A warm sea under a waning moon, the water still and dark, and then, from the quiet rock below, a slow rising of pale specks drifting upward like snow falling in reverse. A whole reef letting go at once, sending its next generation into the current, trusting the tides and the moon and whatever inner clock keeps time for animals that have no eyes to watch the sky. A reef is rarely just a reef. It is a city, and like any city, its meaning comes from who lives there, who passes through, who hides in its alleys, who hunts in its open squares, who raises young in its quiet corners. Scientists estimate that around a quarter of all ocean species spend some part of their lives among coral reefs. That is a remarkable share for a habitat that covers less than 1% of the seafloor. Why so many living things gather in so small a space remains one of the gentler mysteries of marine biology. Picture the reef at dawn. The water above it is dim and silver. Small fish drift out from cracks in the limestone, their colors barely visible yet. Larger fish hang in the current, slow and watchful. Shrimp peer from holes the size of a fingertip. An octopus folds itself into a gap no wider than a coin. Each one occupies a different shelf, a different shadow, a different layer of the reef's strange architecture. The structure built by tiny polyps somehow makes room for thousands of guests. One idea is that reefs are crowded because their shapes offer so many hiding places. A flat seafloor offers nowhere to flee. A reef offers ledges, tunnels, branches, crevices, overhangs, pockets, and chambers. Each creature can find a size of hole that fits only its body. Predators cannot follow. Some researchers think this single feature, the sheer number of nooks, explains a great deal of the diversity. Other researchers wonder if hiding places alone are not enough. They point to the food, the light, the warm, steady temperatures, the gentle flow of nutrients. The honest answer is that we do not fully know which factor matters most, or whether they only work together. The neighbors of a reef extend beyond the reef itself. Just past its edge lies the open water where larger fish patrol and where larvae drift in and out on the currents. Below it, sandy plains stretch into the dim distance where rays glide low and worms tunnel through the grains. Beside it, often lie meadows of seagrass swaying like underwater fields. And further toward shore, mangrove forests rise from the shallows, their roots tangled into dark, quiet nurseries. These four neighbors, the reef, the grass, the mangrove, and the open sea, seem to be woven into a single living fabric. Young fish hatched among coral may spend their childhood in the mangrove roots. As they grow, they move out to the grass beds. As adults, they return to the reef. Cut one piece away, and the others grow quieter. We are still learning exactly how tightly these four are bound. Smaller neighbors matter too. Tiny shrimp clean parasites from the skin of larger fish at agreed-upon stations along the reef. Worms filter water from inside coral skeletons. Sea urchins graze on algae that would otherwise smother the polyps. The relationships are dense and old and not fully mapped. Remove one species, and the consequences can ripple in ways researchers cannot always predict. There is a quieter mystery here as well. Why does diversity grow as you move from the cold poles toward the warm tropics? Reefs sit near the heart of this pattern. Some thinkers suggest the tropics have been stable for so long that more species have had time to evolve. Others suggest the warm water itself speeds up the pace of change. Still others wonder if the energy of constant sunlight simply allows more kinds of life to fit side by side. The question of why the tropics and the reefs within them hold so many species is a question biologists have asked for more than a century. It remains open. A reef city is also a city of communication. Fish change color to signal mood. Shrimp tap their claws. Crabs wave their legs. Corals themselves may send chemical messages through the water, though much of that conversation is still being studied. We do not know what fraction of these signals we can read, and what fraction we are still missing entirely. Drifting above such a place, you would see only a textured carpet of color and motion. The deeper truth, the layered city, the bordering meadows, the mangrove nurseries, the open hunting grounds beyond would be invisible from above. So much of the reef's importance lies in what it shares with everything around it, and so much of why it matters, why a quarter of the sea's species cluster here, remains a question whose full answer waits patiently below the surface, in the quiet conversations of creatures we have only begun to overhear. Tonight, we drift toward something almost impossibly slow, the building of stone by living things. Not the quick stone of a riverbed pebble, or the slow stone of a mountain pushed up by colliding plates, but the patient, layered, animal-made stone of a coral reef. Each ridge, each branch, each great mound began as a thin film of calcium carbonate laid down by a creature smaller than a grain of rice. And the speed of that work is so gentle, so unhurried, that it sits at one of the strange extremes of the living world. A single coral colony, on average, grows by only a few millimeters a year. Some of the slowest, the great brain corals and massive boulder corals, may add no more than 5 millimeters to their height across an entire calendar year. Others, the branching staghorn corals, can stretch their fingers out by 10 or even 15 centimeters in a year when conditions are kind. Even at that quicker pace, building a reef the size of a city neighborhood takes thousands of years. Building a reef the size of a small country takes tens of thousands. The Great Barrier Reef, in its current form, is thought to be around 6,000 to 8,000 years old. The limestone beneath it, the older bones of older reefs that grew and died and grew again, may rest on foundations more than 500,000 years old. Some researchers suspect the layered base could be even older, reaching back through ice ages we barely understand. The question of exactly when the deepest layers began is still open, because drilling down through that much stone is slow, expensive work, and the record grows fainter the further back you go. The scale of what these tiny animals have built is hard to hold in the mind. The Great Barrier Reef stretches for roughly 2,300 kilometers along the eastern edge of Australia. From orbit, it shows up as a long, pale ribbon against the deep blue. It is, by some measures, the largest structure ever made by living things on Earth. Larger than any city, larger than any forest, when you count by the sheer weight of what the builders themselves produced. And yet, every gram of it came from creatures you could fit on the tip of your finger. There is something quietly extreme about that ratio. The builders are among the smallest animals that bother to build anything at all. The thing they build is among the largest. Between those two scales lies an enormous span of time, working through generations stacked on generations, polyp upon polyp, skeleton upon skeleton. Like a coral reef is really a kind of cathedral built by tenants who never see the finished roof. The extremes go in the other direction too. The tallest single coral column ever measured rises more than 30 meters from the seafloor, taller than many office buildings. It was found near the Great Barrier Reef in 2020, standing alone, separate from the main reef wall. How long it had been there, growing in patience, no one is entirely sure. The estimate stretches into the hundreds of years for the visible portion, and possibly far longer for the base beneath it. Some individual coral colonies are thought to be among the oldest living animals on the planet. Certain massive boulder corals in the Pacific have been estimated at over 4,000 years old. They began their slow work when the pyramids were new. They are still working now. Whether the same genetic individual has persisted across all those centuries, or whether the colony has been quietly replacing itself piece by piece, is a question marine biologists still debate. A coral colony is a strange thing in that way. It blurs the line between a single creature and a community of clones. The chemistry of the work itself is also at an extreme. To pull calcium and carbonate from seawater and lock them into hard mineral, the polyp must shift the chemistry of the tiny pocket beneath its body. It does this against the natural flow, spending energy to make the water in that pocket more friendly to crystal formation. Across a whole reef, across whole oceans, the steady drip of this work has shaped the chemistry of the sea itself over geologic time. How much carbon the world's reefs have locked away in their stone is not fully known. Estimates exist, but the deeper limestone layers are hard to measure. What is clear is that the patient mineral architecture below the living surface holds an immense quiet weight, a weight built 1 millimeter at a time by animals so small they almost vanish into the water that feeds them. Let us slow down now and look at something small. A single coral polyp, no bigger than a grain of rice, sitting inside its tiny cup of limestone. If you could shrink down to its size, you would see a soft, transparent body ringed with a crown of fine tentacles. Inside that body, tucked into the lining of its cells, live the algae that feed it. Together they make a quiet partnership that has lasted for hundreds of millions of years. And it is this partnership, this small and gentle balance, that begins to falter when the water grows too warm. The temperature window is narrower than you might guess. Most reef-building corals thrive in water between about 23 and 29 degrees Celsius. A rise of just 1 or 2 degrees, held for a few weeks, is enough to disturb the balance inside the polyp. The algae begin to produce too much of certain chemicals as they try to manage the heat. To the coral, those chemicals start to feel like a kind of poison. So the polyp does something strange. It pushes its tiny partners out. This is what we call bleaching. The coral does not die in that moment. It simply lets go of its inner color, and what remains is the pale skeleton showing through clear tissue. The reef turns white in patches, like a snowfall under the sea. Up close, through a microscope, you can watch the algae drift away in slow plumes, leaving behind a polyp that is still alive, still breathing, but suddenly hungry and exposed. There is a beauty in the small details here that researchers often pause to describe. The fine ridges along a coral skeleton, called septa, become more visible once the color fades. Each species writes a different pattern, like the whorls of a fingerprint. Some are starbursts, some are honeycombs, some are delicate flower shapes only a few millimeters across. In a healthy reef, these patterns are hidden under living tissue, but in a bleached reef, they emerge briefly, like an old etching surfacing through worn paint. Whether the coral can survive depends on many small things. How long the warm water lingers, whether clouds pass overhead to soften the sun, whether a current arrives carrying cooler water from the deep. If the heat eases in time, the algae can return, drifting back into the polyp cells from the surrounding water. Slowly, the color seeps back in, brown and gold and green. If the heat lingers too long, the polyp starves and the soft tissue sloughs away, leaving the bare skeleton behind for other creatures to colonize. What scientists still puzzle over is why some corals on the same reef bleach while their neighbors do not. Two colonies, a meter apart in the same water, can respond in completely different ways. One possibility is that the algae living inside them are slightly different strains, some more tolerant of heat than others. Another idea is that the coral animal itself carries small genetic differences that change how it handles stress. A third thought is that microbes living on the coral's surface, a thin, invisible film, may play a quiet role in resilience. The question remains open. There are smaller details still. In the hours before visible bleaching, some corals begin to glow more brightly under blue light, producing fluorescent pigments that may act as a kind of sunscreen. Researchers have watched colonies turn vivid pink, violet, and yellow in the days before they pale. It looks almost like a final blooming. Whether this glow truly protects the coral, or whether it is a last signal calling the algae to return, is something that researchers still wonder about. Even the sound of the reef changes. A healthy reef hums with snaps and clicks and the soft chewing of fish on algae. A reef under heat stress grows quieter, the small noises thinning out as creatures move away or grow still. Hydrophones, the underwater microphone scientists, lower from boats, pick up this slow hush long before the eye can see the change. These are the quiet textures of warming water, not a dramatic collapse, but a slow shift in color, in sound, in chemistry. A loosening of a partnership that took millions of years to build. We do not yet know how much heat each species can endure, or how quickly some might learn to tolerate more. The polyp does not announce its struggle. It simply lets its colors go, one by one, and waits to see whether the world will cool again in time. So we sit with that small image, a pale coral in clear water, a delicate skeleton showing through. A partnership paused, holding its breath while the ocean decides what comes next. For most of human history, no one knew that coral reefs could turn white. Sailors saw the bright colors of healthy reefs from above. They wrote about gardens of stone in warm, shallow seas. They sketched the shapes in their logbooks and gave the corals odd names. But the slow draining of color, the soft fade to bone, was something almost no one had recorded before the 20th century. The first written notes of large patches of pale coral came from a small number of marine scientists in the 1920s and 1930s. They worked in places like the Florida Keys and the Dry Tortugas, where shallow water made it easy to wade and observe. They saw that some corals had lost their usual warm browns and greens. Underneath, the limestone skeleton showed through like chalk. The scientists were puzzled. The corals were not dead. They were still there, still standing, but somehow emptied of their color. For decades, this was treated as a local oddity, a strange thing that happened now and then in shallow lagoons during a very hot summer. No one had a name for it yet. No one had connected the pale patches in Florida with similar pale patches that divers later noticed in the Caribbean and the Pacific. The ocean is wide, and reports traveled slowly. The puzzle sat quietly in the margins of marine biology. The word bleaching came into common use in the 1980s. By then, scuba gear had improved enough that researchers could swim along reefs for hours, mapping them in detail. Underwater cameras had become small enough to carry, and reports of widespread whitening began arriving from many corners of the tropics at once. In 1983, large areas of reef in the eastern Pacific turned ghostly during a strong warming event in the sea. Scientists who had spent careers studying healthy coral now had to ask what they were looking at. The breakthrough came from microscope work. Researchers took small samples of bleached coral tissue and compared them to samples of healthy coral. The healthy tissue was full of tiny golden cells, the algae partners that live inside coral and feed it through sunlight. The bleached tissue was nearly empty. The algae were gone. The coral was still alive, but it had lost its food supply, its color, and much of its strength. It was holding on, waiting, hungry. That discovery reshaped how people thought about reefs. A coral was not one creature but two, and the partnership could break. When the water grew too warm for too long, the algae left, or the coral expelled them, or both. The exact trigger inside the cells is still debated. Some researchers think the algae begin producing harmful byproducts under heat stress, and the coral pushes them out to protect itself. Others think the coral simply loses its grip on the partnership when its own systems are strained. The question remains open. Even more puzzling was what came next. Some bleached reefs recovered within months. If the water cooled, the algae returned and the color slowly came back. Other reefs, bleached for the first time, never recovered at all. Why some sites bounced back and others did not became one of the central mysteries of reef science. Was it the species of coral, the strain of algae, the depth of the water, the currents that carried in fresh algae from elsewhere? No single answer has emerged. In the 1990s and 2000s, satellites began tracking sea surface temperatures across whole oceans. For the first time, researchers could see warming patches form, drift, and fade in near real time. They could match those patches against reports from divers in the water. A pattern emerged. Long, slow heat waves in the sea lined up with widespread bleaching. Short spikes of heat did less damage. The duration mattered as much as the temperature itself. That was a clue, but it raised new questions about why certain corals tolerated heat better than their neighbors only meters away. Today, the puzzle has many threads. Some corals carry algae strains that handle heat well. Some live in pools that warm and cool sharply each day, which may make them tougher. Some reefs in remote, cooler waters seem almost untouched, while reefs in busy coastal areas struggle. Researchers are still trying to understand why. They are still asking what recovery really means and whether a reef that comes back looks the same as the one that was lost. The history of bleaching is not really a history of discovery. It is a history of slowly noticing, of finding a pale patch and asking why, of learning that a tiny animal and a tiny plant, locked together for millions of years, can quietly let go. Walk through certain stretches of desert, and you may find yourself standing on the bones of a reef. The stone beneath your boots, dry and pale and warmed by a high sun, was once alive beneath a warm sea. The wind moves over it now where currents once did. The silence above it is the silence of a place that forgot long ago that it used to breathe underwater. This is one of the strangest truths about coral reefs. They are not only ocean creatures of the present, they are also a kind of fossil architecture, scattered across continents in places no diver could ever reach. In the Guadalupe Mountains of West Texas and New Mexico, a great wall of pale limestone rises from the dry land. It is called the Capitan Reef, and it formed about 265 million years ago, when a shallow tropical sea covered what is now scrubland and cactus. The reef builders of that time were not the same animals we see today. They were sponges, algae, and other creatures whose names mostly belong to the deep past. But the shape they left behind is unmistakable. A reef is a reef, even when the water is gone. You can find similar ghosts in the European Alps. Some of the highest peaks in Austria and Italy are made of pale stone that began as warm water reefs in a sea called Tethys. The mountains were lifted slowly by the slow grinding of continents. What was once a quiet, shallow garden of coral and shell became, over many millions of years, a cliff face wrapped in snow. Climbers who reach the summit are, in a quiet sense, standing on top of a reef. It is a strange thing to hold in the mind as you drift towards sleep. The same kind of structure that today shimmers in turquoise water off the coast of Australia once shimmered in warm, shallow seas where deserts and mountains now stand. The reef builders changed. The continents moved. The oceans rose and fell. And still, again and again, tiny animals gathered together and made limestone cities. And then those cities were lifted into the sky or stranded on dry land when the seas withdrew. Geologists who study these ancient reefs sometimes find themselves working in landscapes that feel like the opposite of what they study. They walk across sand and stone under a hot, dry sky, and they read the rock the way someone might read an old letter. The shapes of fossil corals press into the stone. The outlines of ancient lagoons appear in subtle changes of color. Sometimes, in a single afternoon, a researcher can walk across what was once a reef crest, then a reef slope, then the deep, quiet basin beyond. The whole shape of a vanished sea spreads out beneath the feet. What remains uncertain is exactly how those old reefs lived and died. They were built by different organisms in different ages. The Capitan Reef was made largely by sponges and algae cementing together, not the stony corals we know today. Other ancient reefs were built by creatures called rudists, strange tube-shaped clams that grew in dense thickets and then vanished forever about 66 million years ago. Some researchers think the great reef-building creatures of the past collapsed during mass extinctions, and each time, a different group of animals took over the work of building. Others wonder if the changes were slower and more tangled than that. The fossil record is patient, but incomplete. There is something humbling in the thought. Reefs have been built and lost on this planet many times. They have appeared, flourished for tens of millions of years, and then faded as the climate or the chemistry of the sea shifted. The current style of reef, built by the stony corals we know, is only the latest version. It is old by human standards, but young by the standards of the rock. When you stand on a piece of desert limestone and run your hand across its rough surface, you are touching something that was once alive and warm and full of small movements. The polyps that built it have been gone for longer than mammals have walked the earth. And yet, the shape they made endures. It waits, patient and dry, while new reefs grow in new oceans far away. For tonight, let that thought settle gently. The reefs of the world are older than we sometimes remember. They have come and gone. They have been buried, lifted, weathered, and revealed. And the small builders of the sea, in some form, have always returned. Whether they will return again after the changes ahead is a question still waiting in the rock. When most of us picture a coral reef, we imagine warm, shallow water, bright sunlight slanting down through blue waves, and fish flashing between pink and yellow branches. That picture is true, but it is only part of the story. Far below the surface, in water so deep that no sunlight ever reaches it, other reefs are quietly growing. They live in cold, dark, slow-moving water. They build their stony shapes without any help from the sun. And for a long time, almost no one knew they were there. These are the cold water reefs. They grow on the slopes of underwater mountains, along the edges of continents, and in deep canyons that drop far below the reach of light. The water around them can be near freezing. The pressure is heavy. The dark is complete. Yet the same kind of tiny animals that build the warm, shallow reefs are at work down here too, slowly laying down limestone, branch by branch, over thousands of years. The biggest known cold water reef stretches along the deep slopes off the coast of Norway. It is built mostly by a coral called Lophelia, which forms pale, ghostly thickets in water hundreds of meters deep. There are similar reefs near Scotland, off the coast of Ireland, along the edges of the eastern United States, and around the cold, dark seamounts of the southern oceans. Some of them are older than the human cities above the waves. What makes them so strange is that they cannot rely on the partnership that powers the shallow reefs. Up in the sunlit water, corals share their bodies with tiny algae that make food from light. Down in the dark, there is no light to share, so the deep corals must catch every meal themselves. They reach out with their thin tentacles and pluck drifting bits of food from the slow currents that brush past them. Each polyp is a patient hunter in the cold. This is where the connections begin to show. The food that drifts down to these deep reefs comes from far above. Sunlight strikes the surface of the sea. Tiny floating plants grow in that light. They are eaten by tiny floating animals. Those animals die or are eaten in turn, and their leftovers drift down through the water as a slow, quiet snow. Scientists call it marine snow. The deep reefs eat that snow, Without the sun shining on the surface, the dark reefs below would slowly starve. So, even a reef that has never seen sunlight depends on the sun. The whole ocean is stitched together this way. Warm currents carry heat from the tropics toward the poles. Cold currents sink and slide along the seafloor, carrying oxygen down into the dark. Wind pushes water across the surface. Storms stir up nutrients. Rivers pour minerals from distant mountains into the sea. Every reef, shallow or deep, sits inside this enormous slow machine. The connections reach even further. Volcanoes, far away on land, can send ash and gases high into the air. Those gases can change the temperature of the sky for years. The sky changes the reef. When a volcano on one continent erupts, a coral on the other side of the world may feel a small, distant echo of it in the chemistry of its water. The atmosphere matters too. The gases we add to the air slowly mix into the ocean. Some of those gases make the seawater a little more acidic over time. That softer, more acidic water makes it harder for corals to build their hard limestone skeletons, whether they live in sunlight or in the deep dark. The shallow reefs and the cold reefs share this challenge. They are two ends of the same long thread. How much of the deep cold water reef world is still unknown is itself an open question. Researchers keep finding new ones. A submersible drops into a canyon no one has explored, and there, in the headlights, are pale coral branches that have been growing quietly for centuries. Some scientists wonder if the deep reefs could one day act as quiet refuges, sheltering life while the shallow reefs struggle with warming water. Others wonder whether the deep reefs are just as vulnerable, only on a slower clock, and we simply have not watched them long enough to see the damage yet. The evidence is incomplete. Both ideas remain possible. What seems clear is that no reef stands alone. The sun, the wind, the currents, the falling snow of tiny lives, the distant volcanoes, the gases in the sky, all of it plays together in one long, slow song. And somewhere in the cold dark, a pale coral opens its tentacles and catches a small piece of that song drifting down from far above. Stone remembers. When a coral colony dies and its soft tissues fade away, the limestone skeleton remains. Layer upon layer, century upon century, these skeletons press together into rock. Geologists slice through ancient reefs and read them, almost like the rings of a tree. They can see warm seas and cool ones, calm centuries and stormy ones, times when reefs spread wide, and times when they shrank back to thin ribbons along forgotten coasts. And yet, for all the stories the stone tells, there are stories it cannot tell. The fossil record is a quiet archive with missing pages. It saves the skeleton, but not the soft polyp that built it. It saves the shape of the reef, but not the colors that once shimmered there. It saves the broad outline of a vanished world, but not the small daily life within it. So when scientists study how reefs have changed over the deep stretch of time, they are reading a book where half the chapters have dissolved away. The oldest reef-like structures on Earth go back more than 400 million years, built by creatures that no longer exist. There were corals before our modern corals, with different body plans and different ways of making stone. Some of them vanished during the great extinctions, when the chemistry of the sea shifted too far, too fast. New corals rose to take their place slowly over millions of patient years. The reefs we know today are only the latest version of a very old idea. This long history offers a strange comfort and a quiet warning at the same time. Reefs have died before, on a global scale, and reefs have returned. Life has found its way back to the warm shallows again and again. But the gaps between collapse and recovery were not measured in human lifetimes. They stretched across millions of years, far longer than any civilization, far longer than our species has existed. The stone tells us reefs can come back. The stone does not promise they will come back soon. Right now, in our own brief moment, the reefs are changing faster than the fossil record can usually capture. Warming water, shifting chemistry, stronger storms, and quieter pressures from coastal life all press on them at once. Some reefs that were vivid only a few decades ago have grown pale and thin. Others have shifted in their species mix, losing the slow-growing branching corals and keeping only the tougher, rounder kinds. A reef may still be there, in outline, while the life inside it quietly rearranges. What the future fossil record will preserve from this moment is still an open question. Limestone laid down today will keep the shapes of corals that survive. It may not record the corals that disappeared too quickly to leave good skeletons behind. It may not show the lost fish, the lost sponges, the lost crabs that lived among the branches. A future geologist, reading our layer in the rock, might see only a thinning, a simplifying, a pause. They would not see the brightness we are losing. There are competing ideas about how to read these slow changes. One view holds that reefs are remarkably resilient, that they have weathered worse and will weather this too, given enough time and enough untouched corners of the sea. Another view holds that the speed of change matters more than the size of it, and that fast change is harder to survive than slow change, even when the slow change is larger. Both ideas rest on careful study of the same ancient stones, and both leave a great deal unresolved. There is also the question of what scale we should care about. From the point of view of the planet, a few thousand years of empty seas is a small pause. From the point of view of a human child born tonight, a few thousand years is forever. The fossil record speaks in one scale. We live in another. Bridging the two is one of the hardest problems in this field, and there is no agreed-upon answer. So the reefs are changing as they have always changed, and the change is being written into stone, as it has always been written. The difference now may be the pace, or it may be the pattern, or it may be something more subtle that we have not yet learned to see. The limestone keeps growing in some places, it keeps dissolving in others. Somewhere in that slow arithmetic, the future of these undersea cities is being decided one quiet layer at a time. What that final record will look like and who will be there to read it remains a question the stone has not yet answered. Light is the quiet artist of the reef. It slips down through the surface in long golden shafts, bending as it moves from air to water, softening as it sinks. The shallower corals bathe in this light. They have shaped their whole existence around it, and the light, in turn, has shaped the chemistry of the ocean itself in ways we still do not fully understand. Most of the colors you see on a healthy reef are not the corals themselves. They are the tiny algae living inside the coral's flesh. These algae need light the way a garden needs sun. They take in sunlight and carbon, and they give the coral the sugars it needs to grow its limestone home. Without light, this partnership goes dark. The algae cannot feed, the coral cannot build, and the chemistry of the water around them begins to shift in slow, quiet ways. That chemistry is one of the deeper mysteries of the reef. Corals do not just live in the ocean. They change the ocean. As they build their stony skeletons, they pull dissolved minerals out of the water and lock them into limestone. Over millions of years, this has shaped the balance of carbon in the sea and even, some researchers think, in the air above it. How much of Earth's atmosphere has been quietly tuned by these tiny builders is still an open question. The chemistry that matters most to a coral is delicate. The water must hold enough dissolved calcium and carbonate for the polyps to weave their skeletons. If the balance tips, the building slows. If it tips far enough, the limestone itself can begin to soften. As the ocean takes in more carbon from the air, the water grows slightly more acidic. Not acidic like a lemon, just a small shift, almost too small to notice. But corals notice. Some studies suggest their growth slows in waters with even gentle changes in acidity. Other studies find certain species cope better than expected. The full picture remains unresolved. Light plays a part in this chemistry too. During the day, when sunlight pours down and the algae are busy turning carbon into sugar, the water around a healthy reef can become slightly less acidic. At night, when the algae rest, the chemistry quietly shifts back. The reef breathes, in a sense, on a daily rhythm. Researchers have measured these small swings, but how the polyps themselves sense and respond to them is still being worked out. Color also tells a story. The blue of clear reef water comes from the way water absorbs red light first, then orange, then yellow, leaving only the cool blues to scatter back to your eye. The deeper you go, the more colors fall away. By the time you reach 30 meters down, almost everything looks blue or gray to a human eye. Yet the corals there still glow with hidden pigments. Some of these pigments seem to act like sunscreen, shielding the algae from too much light in the shallows. Others may help gather faint light in the deeper zones. Why corals make so many different pigments and what each one truly does is still being studied. There is a quieter chemistry happening as well, one most people never think about. Reefs release small chemical signals into the water. Some of these are scents, drifting on currents, telling fish and crabs and shrimp where home is. Larval fish, drifting in open water as tiny specks, seem to follow these chemical trails back to a reef they have never seen. How they read the chemistry and how a damaged reef changes its scent are questions researchers are only beginning to answer. A bleached reef, some early work suggests, may smell different. It may call fewer young fish home, but the evidence is still thin and the picture is still forming. All of this rests on light. Light feeds the algae. The algae feed the coral. The coral builds the limestone. The limestone shapes the chemistry of the sea. And the chemistry of the sea, over long ages, shapes the air we breathe. It is a quiet chain running from a single sunbeam slanting through clear water down to a polyp the size of a grain of rice and outward to the whole planet. When the light dims, when the water warms, when the chemistry tilts, every link in that chain begins to strain. We can see some of the strain now. We cannot yet see all of it. What we lose when the chemistry shifts, and what the reef might still teach us about the balance of light and water and air, is one of the gentler mysteries the ocean is still keeping. It waits, glowing softly beneath the moving surface. If you could lower a careful ear beneath the surface of a thriving reef, you would not find silence. You would find a kind of soft, living static, a gentle, busy crackle, like rain falling on dry leaves, rising up from every crevice and ledge. For a long time, divers did not know what made that sound. Then, They learned that much of it comes from snapping shrimp, tiny creatures hidden in the coral, closing their claws so fast that a small bubble pops with each snap. Multiply that by thousands of shrimp across a single reef, and the water itself begins to sizzle. Layered on top of that crackle are other voices. Fish grunt and bark and hum to one another, each species speaking in its own soft register. Parrotfish scrape at the coral with hard beaks, grinding limestone into pale sand, and the scraping carries through the water as a slow, rhythmic rasp. Damselfish drum their swim bladders to defend small territories. Groupers rumble low notes that travel surprising distances. The reef sounds something like a city at dusk, if that city were made of water and made entirely of strangers who somehow all know each other. Researchers who study reef sound call this the soundscape. They lower small underwater microphones, called hydrophones, into the water and record for hours, sometimes for months. When they play the recordings back, a healthy reef sounds rich and layered, like a quiet orchestra with many small instruments. A struggling reef sounds different, thinner, quieter, fewer voices, more empty space between the snaps. One open question is how much young sea creatures rely on these sounds to find their way home. Many reef fish begin life as tiny drifting larvae, carried out into the open ocean by currents. After days or weeks, they need to find a reef to settle on. Some experiments suggest the larvae listen for the crackle of a healthy reef and swim toward it. Other studies suggest light and smell matter just as much. Researchers are still working out which clues guide which species and how the loss of sound on a damaged reef might leave young fish wandering, unable to find a place to grow up. There are stranger sounds too. At certain times of year, reefs seem to grow louder at dawn and dusk, a soft chorus that rises and falls with the light. No one is entirely sure why. One idea is that fish call most actively at these times because the water is changing, because predators shift, because feeding begins or ends. Another idea is that the chorus has social meaning we have not yet decoded. The reef may be talking to itself in ways we are only beginning to hear. Scientists have even tried the reverse experiment. They have taken recordings of healthy reefs and played them back over speakers placed near damaged ones. In a few small studies, more young fish settled in the noisy patches than in the silent ones. The reefs sounded alive and life arrived. The findings are early and limited, and many researchers want to see them tested across more places before drawing strong conclusions. Still, the idea is gentle and strange. Sound itself might be one of the threads that holds a reef together. There is also the matter of sound traveling far. Water carries sound much better than air, sometimes for many miles. A whale singing in deep water can be heard by another whale on the other side of an ocean basin. A reef, in its own quieter way, broadcasts its presence into the surrounding sea. How far that broadcast reaches and which creatures listen remains an open question. We know the signal goes out. We do not know who all the listeners are. When a reef bleaches and grows quiet, the change is not only visible, it is audible. The crackle thins, the chorus fades, the hydrophones pick up more of the distant hum of boats and engines, and less of the small, busy voices that once filled the water. Whether a quiet reef can grow loud again, and how long that recovery might take, is a question researchers are still trying to answer. Some recordings hint that as life returns, sound returns with it. Others suggest the silence can linger long after the corals begin to regrow. For tonight, picture yourself drifting just above a reef in warm, dim water. The crackle of shrimp rises around you like soft rain. A fish hums in the distance. A scrape of beak on stone. A low rumble somewhere out beyond the edge. The reef is speaking in a language we have only begun to learn, and most of what it is saying remains, for now, beautifully unknown. Switch off the lamps along a reef at night, then shine a blue light into the water, and something quietly impossible happens. The corals begin to glow. Greens, oranges, soft reds, and electric pinks bloom out of the dark, as if someone painted the seafloor with light. The colors are not reflections. They come from inside the coral itself, made by molecules that drink in one kind of light and breathe out another. And the rules behind that small miracle are written in numbers as clean as music. The molecules responsible are called fluorescent proteins. Each one has a shape so precise that it acts like a tiny instrument. Light arrives carrying a certain amount of energy. The protein absorbs that energy, loses just a little of it as heat, then releases what remains as a new color of light. Because some energy is always lost, the color that leaves is always a longer, gentler wavelength than the color that came in. Blue light enters, green light leaves, green light enters, red light leaves. The math is simple and exact, and it works the same way in every coral, in every ocean. That step from one color to another follows a number physicists call the Stokes shift. It measures the gap between the incoming wavelength and the outgoing one. For most coral proteins, the shift is small, only a few dozen nanometers. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter, smaller than anything your eye could ever see. Yet the difference between a coral that glows green and a coral that glows red can come down to a handful of these tiny units. Nature tunes the instrument by shaving off slivers of distance no human hand could measure without help. The light itself moves at a speed that never changes. In a vacuum, it travels nearly 300,000 kilometers every second. Through seawater, it slows down a little, dragged by the density of salt and water molecules. The ratio between those two speeds is called the index of refraction. And for the ocean, it sits near 1.34. That single number explains why a reef bends sunlight into shifting blue ribbons across the sand. It explains why the deep water swallows red light first, then orange, then yellow, until only blue remains. By 30 meters down, the world is painted in a single color, and the corals that glow in other shades are quietly answering with light the sea has stolen. The energy carried by each particle of light, each photon, follows another tidy rule. Shorter wavelengths carry more energy. Longer wavelengths carry less. A blue photon has more push than a red one, which is why blue light reaches deeper and why corals so often use it as their power source. The fluorescent proteins take that strong blue energy, keep a little, and pass the rest on as something softer. Nothing is created, nothing is wasted in any strange way. The books always balance. Even the spacing of the polyps obeys quiet patterns. Many reef-building corals grow their cups in tight hexagonal packing, the same arrangement bees use in honeycomb. Hexagons fit together without gaps and share walls efficiently, so the coral spends the least possible calcium carbonate to enclose the most possible space. It is the same principle that shapes basalt columns and snowflake arms. The universe seems to like sixes when it is trying to save effort. The branching corals follow a different rule. Their arms split, then split again, then again, in a pattern called self-similarity. Zoom in on one twig and it looks like a smaller copy of the whole colony. Mathematicians call shapes like this fractals, and they appear in ferns, lightning, river deltas, and the bronchial tubes inside your lungs. Why a soft animal in warm salt water reaches for the same geometry as a thundercloud is a question worth holding in the mind for a while. Why corals make the glowing proteins at all is still an open question. One idea is that the proteins act like sunscreen, soaking up harsh light before it can hurt the algae living inside. Another suggests they help in low light, gathering scarce blue photons and shifting them to colors the algae can use more easily. A third proposes they are simply signals, a chemistry the corals use to speak to one another, or to the creatures that drift past. Researchers have evidence for each idea, and none of the theories has won. What stays certain is the elegance of the rules. Light bends by a fixed ratio. Energy steps down by predictable amounts. Polyps tile the seafloor in shapes a geometer would smile at. The reef is mathematics made soft and slow, glowing quietly in the dark. A coral reef is a thing of impossible balance. The temperature of the water must stay within a narrow band, only a few degrees wide. The salt must be just so. The light must reach down through clear water at the right angle, in the right amount. The chemistry of the sea must hold steady, neither too acid nor too sweet. Change any one of these things by a small amount, and the whole quiet city begins to falter. This is the question that sits at the heart of our wondering tonight. Reefs have lived through long stretches of Earth's history. They have seen warm seas and cooler ones. They have survived shifts in sea level and shifts in chemistry. So the question is not whether corals can change. The question is whether they can change fast enough this time. Some researchers think they can. They point to corals that already live in unusual places. In a few shallow lagoons in the Persian Gulf, certain corals survive water that would kill their cousins elsewhere. The water there grows hot in summer, hotter than corals were once thought to bear. And yet somehow, these small communities hold on. Their cells carry slightly different versions of the same old machinery. Their algae partners may be slightly different too. One idea is that these tough corals hold clues. If their tolerance could spread, perhaps reefs in other oceans might gain a little more time. Other researchers are less hopeful. They note that adaptation in nature usually moves slowly. A coral colony may live for decades, even centuries, before it spawns offspring carrying a new mix of traits. The ocean, meanwhile, is warming on a scale of years. The math, they worry, does not match. A creature that changes across generations may not keep pace with a sea that changes across summers. The question remains open. Both sides are looking at the same animals and reading different futures in them. There is also the matter of the partnership we touched on earlier. A coral is not really one creature. It is a polyp and an algae living together, sharing food and shelter in a quiet exchange. When the water grows too warm, that partnership breaks. The polyp casts out its algae and turns pale. Some corals can take in a new kind of algae, one that handles heat a little better. This swapping has been seen in the wild. It offers a thin thread of hope, but the new partners often give less food in return. A coral living with heat-tolerant algae may survive the warm season and then grow more slowly, build its skeleton more weakly, and spawn fewer young. Survival in this case comes at a cost we do not yet fully understand. step back, and the fragility of the whole arrangement becomes clearer. Earth itself sits in a narrow zone where water can stay liquid on the surface. A little closer to the sun, and the oceans would boil away. A little farther, and they would freeze into stone. The thin shell of air above us holds in just enough warmth and filters out just enough harsh light to let soft-bodied creatures build cities of limestone in shallow seas. The reef is a small miracle resting on top of a larger one. It exists because the planet itself exists in a kind of balance we still find astonishing. What would happen if one variable changed? We are, in a sense, watching that experiment unfold. The water is warming. The chemistry is shifting as the sea takes in more carbon from the air, growing slightly more acid, slightly less friendly to the building of shells. These two changes work on the reef at the same time, from different directions. One stresses the living tissue. The other softens the stone foundation. How a coral colony responds to both at once is something marine scientists are still trying to map. There are quiet experiments going on in many places. Researchers raise corals in tanks set to the temperatures of future oceans. They watch which families thrive, which fade. They cross tough parents with tough parents to see what their offspring inherit. The results so far are mixed. Some lines do better, some do not. No one yet knows whether any of this will scale up to reefs that stretch for hundreds of miles. So we sit with the open question: could reefs adapt in time? The honest answer is that we do not know. The balance is delicate. The clock is unclear. The animals are older and stranger than we sometimes give them credit for. They have surprised us before. Whether they surprise us again, in the direction we hope, is something the coming decades will slowly reveal. In quiet laboratories near the coast, in shallow tanks filled with carefully balanced seawater, people are trying something that sounds almost like science fiction. They are trying to grow corals, not just keep them alive, but help them be born, raise them, and return them to the sea. The work is slow, patient, and full of unanswered questions. No one yet knows if it can work at the scale the oceans would need. One approach is the simplest. Researchers break healthy corals into small pieces and attach them to underwater frames. The fragments grow back faster than whole colonies, the way a cutting from a plant can sometimes outpace a seed. Divers tend these underwater gardens like farmers, cleaning algae from the structures, checking for disease. After months or years, the new corals are moved to damaged reefs and cemented into place. Some take hold, some do not. The reasons are not always clear. Another method is more delicate, and it depends on the spawning nights we wondered about earlier. On those rare evenings when corals release their eggs and sperm into the water, researchers wait in boats with nets and jars. They gather the clouds of life before the currents carry them away. Back in the lab, they coax the tiny larvae through their earliest days, sheltering them from the dangers that kill most of them in the wild. Once the larvae are strong enough to settle, the scientists release them onto small clay tiles and lower them back to the reef. The success rate is humbling. In nature, only a tiny fraction of coral larvae ever survive to become adult colonies. In the lab, the numbers are better, but still small. And the corals that do survive must then face an ocean that may be warmer, more acidic, and more crowded with stress than the one their parents knew. Whether these young reefs will be tough enough to last is one of the central open questions of the work. Some researchers are taking the puzzle further. They are trying to find corals that already seem to handle heat well, the rare colonies that stayed alive during bleaching events, while their neighbors faded. These are sometimes called supercorals, though the name is more hopeful than proven. The idea is to breed them or to cross them with other strains in the hope that their hardiness can be passed on. Whether toughness in one place will transfer to another, and whether it will hold over many generations, remains unknown. There are even gentler experiments. Some teams are studying the algae partners that live inside coral tissue, the tiny green guests we met earlier. Different algae handle heat differently. By introducing heat-tolerant algae into young corals, researchers hope to give the animals a built-in shield. Early results are promising in small tanks. What happens in the wide, restless ocean is still being learned. Sound, too, is becoming part of the work. Since healthy reefs hum with the noise of fish and snapping shrimp, some scientists have tried playing recordings of that hum near damaged areas. The idea is that drifting larvae listen for home, and a silent reef may not call them in. Early studies suggest that more young fish settle where the recordings play. Whether the same trick can help corals find their way is a question still being explored. None of these methods, on their own, can save a reef the size of a country. The Great Barrier Reef alone covers an area larger than many nations, and growing corals, one fragment at a time, is slow, careful work. Some researchers wonder whether the goal should be less about rebuilding entire reefs and more about keeping small refuges alive, places where life can wait out the warmest years and seed the recovery later. Others believe the only true answer is to cool the oceans themselves by changing what we do far above the waves. Most agree that no single method will be enough. What is striking about all this work is how much it depends on listening to the spawning calendar of the moon, listening to the chemistry of the water, listening to the sound of a healthy reef, and noticing when it goes quiet. The scientists doing this work do not speak with certainty. They speak in trials and small hopes, in colonies counted one by one. They are not yet sure which methods will matter most, or whether any combination will be enough in time. For tonight, it is enough to picture them. Small lights in coastal laboratories, tanks glowing softly in the dark, young corals, no larger than grains of rice, settling onto tiles, beginning the long, uncertain work of becoming a reef. When a reef goes quiet, the loss is not only the loss of coral, it is the loss of everything the coral was holding up. The small fish that hid in the branches, the cleaner shrimp that worked the gills of larger fish, the octopus that tucked itself into a hollow in the limestone, the sea turtle that grazed the algae from the reef's outer edge. Each one of them depended on the structure the tiny animals built. When the structure softens and crumbles, the neighborhood drifts apart. What this means 1,000 years from now, no one can say with certainty. Some researchers believe that even badly damaged reefs can return if the water steadies and the right larvae find them. Others wonder if the warming will simply move too fast for the slow architects to keep up. The honest answer is that we do not yet know which path the reefs will take. We are watching a long, slow story whose ending has not been written. Step back farther, though, and the picture grows stranger still. 1,000,000 years from now, the continents will have shifted. The Atlantic will be wider, the Pacific will be narrower. Mountains we have not yet named will rise from the seafloor. New coastlines will appear where deserts now stretch, and old coastlines will sink into silt. Reefs, if they still exist, may grow in places no human ever charted. They may belong to species we cannot picture, descendants of the tiny polyps that survived whatever is coming. Life on this planet has done this before. The fossil record holds the outlines of vast ancient reefs built by creatures that are no longer alive. Some were built by corals, shaped differently than the ones we know. Some were built by sponges. Some were built by strange animals with no living relatives at all. After each great change in the sea, the reefs went quiet for a long while, sometimes for millions of years. Then, slowly, new builders arrived, new partnerships formed, new cities of limestone rose in warm, shallow water. Whether that pattern will repeat after this current quieting, no one can say. Push the clock farther still, to 100 million years from now, and the geography of Earth becomes unrecognizable. The atlas in your head dissolves. The familiar shapes are gone. By then, the corals we know today may have been replaced many times over, or they may have left no descendants at all. There may be reefs built by something we would not even recognize as an animal. The sea will still be salty, the sun will still warm the shallows, and somewhere, life will likely still be doing what it has always done, finding small ways to build large things together. 1 billion years on, the sun itself begins to change. It grows slowly brighter, hotter, less forgiving. Some models suggest the oceans of Earth may begin to evaporate, hazing the sky with vapor and reshaping the chemistry of the air. If reefs still exist by then, they will exist in a world that looks nothing like ours. They may retreat to cooler latitudes or to deeper water, or vanish entirely, leaving only their fossilized bones in the rock. What rises after them, if anything, is beyond our ability to picture. And farther still, billions of years from now, the sun will swell into a red giant. The inner planets may be swallowed. The seas of Earth, if any remain, will boil away into space. The reefs, the polyps, the algae, the fish that hid in the branches, all of it will return to atoms and drift outward, joining the slow chemistry of the galaxy. Those same atoms, in time, may find their way into new worlds, new oceans, new shallow seas warmed by the light of younger stars. This is not a sad thought, even if it sounds like one. It is simply the long shape of things. Reefs are not permanent. Nothing is. They are temporary cities built by small lives that did not know they were building. And yet, in their brief moment, they shelter a quarter of the sea. They sing with sound and color. They glow softly in the dark. What we lose when a reef goes quiet is part of a much older pattern of loss and renewal, one the universe has been practicing for billions of years. The mystery is not whether the pattern will continue. The mystery is what shape it will take next, and whether the tiny builders we know today will still be part of it. That answer is not ours to see. We can only listen to the reefs we still have and wonder. Step back now, as far back as the mind can stretch. Picture the Earth from far away, a small blue sphere turning slowly in the dark. The oceans cover most of its surface, soft and shining, and along the warm bands near the equator, you would find them if you could look closely enough. Thin ribbons of life. Reefs. They are so small from this distance that they would vanish into the curve of the planet, yet they are part of something much larger than themselves. Every atom of calcium in every coral skeleton was forged inside a star. Long before the Earth existed, Massive suns lived and died across the galaxy. In their final moments, they scattered heavy elements into the dark. Calcium, carbon, oxygen, the very building blocks of every reef on our world. The same atoms now live inside your bones. The calcium that holds you upright once drifted in a cloud of stardust. So did the calcium inside a coral polyp, building its tiny cup at the bottom of the sea. You and the reef share an origin written in the lives of stars. This is not a poem. This is chemistry. The elements that make life possible were cooked in furnaces we cannot visit, by suns that died billions of years before the first ocean formed. When you think of a reef this way, it becomes something stranger and more beautiful. A coral colony is starlight that has slowed down and taken a shape. The fish that swim through it are starlight too. So are the waves that roll above. So is the moon that pulls those waves into rhythm. Everything we see is the patient handiwork of dying stars. And now, on this one small blue world, that ancient material has arranged itself into reefs that are changing faster than anyone expected. The open question is not only what will happen to the corals, the open question is what their future tells us about life itself, about how fragile and how stubborn it can be at the same time. Some scientists wonder whether reefs will adapt and persist in forms we cannot yet picture. Others suspect that the reefs of the future will be smaller, simpler, quieter places. Still others hold out hope that the experiments now underway, the heat-tested corals in the carefully tended nurseries, will buy enough time for the oceans to stabilize. No one knows. The honest answer is that the future of reefs is unwritten, and the writing is happening now, in the warming water, in the chemistry of every wave. What we do know is that the universe has been making and unmaking complex things for a very long time. Stars are born and die, galaxies merge and drift apart, planets form, cool, sometimes warm again. Against that vast background, a coral reef is a brief, glittering moment. It is also one of the most intricate moments the universe is known to have produced. As far as anyone can tell, nothing quite like a reef exists anywhere else. We have searched other worlds for signs of life, and so far, we have found only silence. The reefs of Earth may be among the most elaborate living structures in this corner of the galaxy. This is part of why the question of their future matters in a way that goes beyond Earth. If we lose the great reefs, the universe loses something it took billions of years to make. The atoms will still be here. The calcium will still exist. But the particular arrangement, the particular living music of a reef, may not return for a very long time. Maybe never in the same form. It is a heavy thought, but it is also a soft one in its way. Because the same vastness that makes reefs precious also reminds us that life is patient. The universe has been kind enough, at least once, to produce something as strange and gentle as a coral garden. Whatever happens in the coming centuries, the deep story of life on Earth is not over. New forms will arise, new patterns will gather, the ocean will keep being the ocean, the stars will keep providing their slow rain of elements, and tonight, somewhere in the warm shallows, polyps are still building. They are doing what they have done for hundreds of millions of years. They are taking starlight in the form of calcium, and they are turning it into something beautiful. They do not know they are doing it. They simply are. And the question of what comes next belongs partly to them, partly to the sea, and partly to us. For now, it remains open. For tonight, That is enough. And so we come to the quiet end of our long, slow visit with the tiny builders of the sea. We have traveled together from the smallest polyp, no larger than a grain of rice, all the way up to reef systems so vast they can be seen from orbit. We have wondered about the partnership between coral and algae, about colors that may serve purposes we have not yet named, about sounds that fade when a reef grows tired. We have sat with the open questions that scientists are still trying to answer, and we have let those questions soften, as questions do, into something gentler than worry. Imagine, for a moment, looking down at the Earth from very far away. The whole planet is a soft blue marble turning slowly in the dark. Clouds drift across it in pale white curls. The continents are quiet shapes of green and tan, and rimming the edges of the warm seas, in places too small to see from this distance, are the reefs. They are not visible from up here, but they are there. Each one is alive. Each one is breathing in its own slow way, exchanging gases with the water, building its limestone walls, one careful layer at a time. Now drift a little closer. The night side of the planet glows in patches of human light. The day side burns gently with reflected sun. The oceans hold most of the surface, and beneath their skin, in shallow shelves around islands and coastlines, the coral cities rest. Many of them are sleeping now in the way that reefs sleep. The daytime fish tucked into crevices, the nighttime hunters slipping out into open water, the polyps themselves extending their tiny tentacles to feed on whatever the current brings. The moon is up over part of the sea. Its light lays a soft silver path across the waves. Below that path, the water grows darker with depth, and somewhere down there, a reef holds its quiet shape. Parrotfish rest in pockets of stone. Small shrimp keep watch in the dark. A turtle drifts above the coral heads. Slow as a thought, the whole scene moves at the speed of breathing. We do not know what will become of these places in the years ahead. We have asked that question all night, and the question remains open. Some reefs may fade, some may adapt in ways we cannot yet predict. Some may be rebuilt by the patient work of people who care for them, planting new corals, one fragment at a time. The future is not written. That is the honest truth of it. And there is something almost comforting in that. The idea that the story is still being told, that the ending is not fixed, that wonder still has room to grow. For tonight, none of that has to be solved. For tonight, the reefs are doing what they have done for millions of years. They are waiting in warm water. They are catching plankton in the dark. They are slowly, patiently laying down the stone that will hold the next generation of life. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of a tide you cannot hear. Let your shoulders soften. Let the day you carried into this room set itself down on the floor beside the bed, where it can wait until morning. The universe is very large, and you are very small inside it, and that smallness is a kind of rest. You do not have to hold the world up tonight. The world is holding itself, the way it always has, the way it will keep doing while you sleep. Somewhere out there, a galaxy is turning. It will turn whether or not anyone watches. Somewhere closer, a reef is breathing in the dark. It will breathe whether or not anyone listens. And somewhere closer still, in this very room, you are here, warm and quiet, carried gently towards sleep by all of these slow, beautiful things. The mystery of the reefs is not finished. Perhaps in our lifetime, we will understand more about how they survive, how they recover, how they speak to one another in chemistry and sound. Perhaps the answers will come slowly, one careful study at a time. For now, the question is enough. The wondering is enough. The soft blue planet turning in the dark is enough. Rest now. Let the tide come in. Let the tide go out. Let the small builders keep their patient work beneath the waves. Subscribe for a brand new space topic every night. One tap and something incredible is waiting for you tomorrow. Sweet dreams.